right, I am so excited to have Dr. Kruse on the line. He's one of the, after doing 560, I don't know what this is going to be episode 569. After doing 569 shows and after having been in the natural and alternative health world since 2003, I could say that Dr. Kruse has had probably the biggest impact on my thinking and my health and everything that I'm doing. So he's an amazing guy. So I'm super excited to have him back. He was back on episode 466 as well as episode 174. So this will be the third time that he's been on, which is really cool. But I feel like we've laid a foundation with him. And if you guys aren't familiar with his work, he is a prolific dude. He is doing some really, really cool things. He lost, I think it was like 70 pounds in 3 months and 100 pounds in a year. And get this. So this is something that's really going to shock you. He did that without even changing his diet. He did that using something called the leptin protocol, as well as cold thermogenesis. And he is a big proponent of light, water, and magnetism way beyond food. So food is like way down the list in terms of how important food is, because really it's all about photosynthesis. It's all about light. And since I had him on the show last, episode 466, radically changed so many different areas of my life. Doing the cold water thing down at the ocean, and I think it's about 58, 59 degrees. Doing all of my workouts in the backyard now. I got the blue blocking sunglasses. Doing all kinds of cool things. Got the swimwear that allows the sun to get through. So it's like he's radically changed my life, and he's just a profound guy. And let me just turn his mic up really quick. Oh, Doc, thanks for being on the show today, my friend.
Hey, no problem. Anytime.
Yeah. So how is the weather and the sun today in New Orleans?
It's actually nice. It's a Monday. We're in the middle of Mardi Gras. We've already been through a week. It's about 65 degrees and sunny.
Okay.
Yesterday it was very nice. It was almost 80 here yesterday.
Oh, my goodness. That's great. You having fun talking with people on the streets and just enjoying people's company?
Yeah, it's been nice. We have a lot of friends and family coming in starting this week because this week, starting with Thursday all the way through Fat Tuesday, basically New Orleans shuts down. It's the part of the United States that will be actively partying while the rest of you work.
Oh, that's so great. That's so cool. Like I said before, I'm not sure if I said this on the show, but I've been going through a lot of your stuff, and what's really kind of liberating with what you talk about in terms of light, water, and magnetism. It's really liberating in a sense because you go kind of after the food gurus, and you go on kind of after the people that are talking about diet and nutrition, and that's all a good thing, but ultimately it comes down to electrons and mitochondria and light, water, and magnetism, right? I mean, that's the basis of health.
Yeah, I think food gurus, physicians, functional medicine doctors, and really anybody in either allopathic medicine or the functional world or alternative world, they talk about things they understand. Mm-hmm. And most people understand proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids, although I would even say that even those experts don't really know what they're talking about in totality. Mm-hmm. But I try to point out some of the obvious things that most people don't realize are off the menu. And this is actually the basis of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically says we're not aware of what we don't know. And if that turns out that it's the most important part, you can really make some catastrophic decisions in your life. And it turns out that when you actually look at a mitochondria, I think everybody listening to this show can open up any biochemistry book and we'll get universal agreement that all energy flux through a cell is via the mitochondria. So then it behooves us to say, well, how do we turn carbohydrates, proteins, and fats into energy? And it turns out we don't do it with macronutrients. We do it with electrons and protons. Mm-hmm. And that's when we got to stop people and say, okay, how much do your supposed experts know about electrons, protons, and light? And that's when you'll see a lot of startled faces. And unfortunately, when you're in social media, you'll note that most people, that's all they talk about. And the thing that I always love to point out, just to a simple person who doesn't know anything about science, if diets really were the key, we average between 250 and 300 diet books are published every January.
Mm-hmm.
How come nobody's solved the problem yet with food?
Right, I know.
Maybe the issue is our beliefs tied to food may be the real problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where a guy like me comes in, because there's this big trend in medicine, and it's called biophysics or quantum biology.
Mm-hmm.
And that field is relatively new. It's got a long, long history going back over 100 years, but it's really changed with a guy named Doug Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy, he's at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's probably the world expert in mitochondria. And then there's another guy, an evolutionary biologist at University College of London named Nick Lane, who I think is a real bright guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's missing key parts, but they're focused in finally on the key metric for health, which is mitochondria. And I need everybody to become a mitochondriac to actually understand the perspective that I have, that pretty much NASA has got it right. When they look for extraterrestrial life, what are their three metrics? Light, water, and magnetism.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they use to find it. And I think what medicine needs to do is they need to use the same three metrics to figure out why the public, our clients, and our patients have the chronic health diseases that they have. It actually all funnels back to light, water, and magnetism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And I'm looking at your Facebook page, and you just posted this, and you say the world needs less food gurus and more light gurus. And what you write on there is pretty interesting. You say only 4 days of simulated only 4 days of simulated night shift work is enough to reduce insulin sensitivity. And then, so you say still think it's all about food choices, and that's so true.
Exactly, and that's the key part. I want people to know that just the light environment change is enough to cause the biochemical changes that lead to diabetes, that lead to metabolic syndrome, that lead to the diseases that everybody talks about. You don't need the food to do it. In fact, I've posted in many of the Food Gurus groups that if you put somebody in a blue lit room, you can actually stimulate insulin release without any food via their eyes. And this should begin to get some people to begin to question, well, wait a minute. Our world now is 24/7 blue lit. All our screens, our laptops, our phones, our TVs. Think about what happened with TVs in 2009 with Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Analog to digital and made everything LCD and LED. Well, LED lights have a color temperature of 5,750 Kelvin. That is the exact same color temperature of solar noon. So that means that our population, for probably the last 75 years, has been inundated with a signal to its brain via the central retinal pathways that it's solar noon 24/7. We've never stimulated or seen a true winter. Part of the reason why we've got a lot of the problems we do, because guess what? The electromagnetic antenna that's in your body is called a mitochondria. It pays attention to the power density changes of the 4 seasons that you live in based on your location on the planet. That's how it's designed to work. And people don't realize that seasonal change really is a story of power density change in terms of how the electromagnetic fields around us change between summer, winter, spring, and fall. And it's an effect not only on the sun, but it's also an effect of the Earth's magnetic field. It's not the same everywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, see, so I've been going through your stuff, and you've laid such an amazing foundation, I feel like, out there. And I just have a ton of questions. So when I was going through your stuff, I would just watch all of your YouTube videos and listen to the previous shows that we've done. And I just wrote down a ton of different questions. And are you okay just kind of going question and answer style?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Okay, one of the things I wanted to ask you, do you think there's an issue with acid rain changing the immune system of sea life, causing parasites and things to be in seafood? Do you think that's an issue?
No.
No?
Nope. Do I think acid rain's an issue? Yeah, it affects the hydrogen bonding networks in seawater, but the issue with fish is actually much more complex than that. It's actually tied to the energy flux that's present between the sun and the oceans, and that's extremely complex science.
Mm-hmm.
But no, acid rain doesn't have a big, huge effect on marine seafood, because most of the seafood that we're harvesting is coming from polar regions. The seafood that's harvested within probably the 30s, and I'm talking about 30 north, 30 south latitude. If you know anything about the marine seafood chain,
mm-hmm.
that fish is very, how shall we say, not populated in these type of waters. The warmer the water is, the less fish is present. The colder the water is, the more fish is present. It turns out the colder the water is, the more DHA the fish has, and the warmer the water is, and that's where acid rain really has a massive impact, is along the tropical belts.
Okay.
And believe it or not, that's actually tied to something I've been talking about on my Patreon blog series, which is actually the deuterium content of water. And that's actually what drives the process.
Okay.
Proton flows in living quantum systems, which seafood is affected big time by both temperature and pH. And it turns out that the pH of seawater is pretty tightly regulated with the ionosphere and the atmosphere's chemistry. Now, man's effect on the atmosphere via geoengineering can have massive effects in different parts of the world, but it turns out that most of the geoengineering that we're doing, excuse me, is over land masses to affect the climate, not so much over the open oceans.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious about that because I've been kind of reading about that. And okay, so I want to ask you too about what are your thoughts, because your big thing, and it's making so much sense to me, is light and how light affects the body. What do you think about, there's treatments out there like ultraviolet blood irradiation, which is essentially exposing the blood to light. What do you think about that?
Well, let me give you a disclaimer before we get into that. My belief is that everybody should use nature first before they start to use man-made ideas that steal some of nature's mechanisms.
Okay.
And the blood in our body basically acts as a magnetohydrodynamic fluid. And what does that mean? It means that it absorbs electric and magnetic energy from the sun and transfers it down into our mitochondria, into all the cytochromes. That's effectively what blood really does. So if you realize that you happen to live in an environment because of your poor choices that doesn't allow a good connection with either the earth or the sun, then I think UV blood irradiation can be a reasonable option for you to discuss with your doc.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Because I know a lot of people are using that, and I just, trying to make all the connections of different doctors we talk to and different treatments and things, and someone brought that up to me, and I thought I need to ask Dr. Kruse that.
The key thing is, just so you know, that if you get involved in using things like that, it becomes incumbent upon the patient or the client to realize that you are putting a significant amount of trust in that clinician to know exactly what they're doing. And it's my belief today that there's not very many clinicians out there, whether it be in functional medicine or allopathic medicine, that truly understand the ins and outs of UV blood irradiation. The best way for us to do it is actually to take our clothes off, go outside, stand grounded for a period of time that matches up with our Fitzpatrick skin type in order to get that blood irradiation naturally. Mm-hmm. How animals are designed to get it. Because once you understand the natural process, then you begin to understand, okay, now maybe I understand this. And the problem is for a patient or a client to really ask the question of the doctor requires them to know some of the knowledge. In other words, they have to become mitochondriacs. Mm-hmm. And that's why I do what I do, because I'm trying to teach people the questions to ask people, because once you ask very good open-ended questions, you can uncover the dogma in your doctor or your healthcare provider very quickly, and you'll know immediately whether this is somebody you can trust or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true. Speaking of spending time outside, that's something that I've been doing a lot lately. Now you have me getting up and looking at the sun in the morning, and what I'm trying to figure out is, I was reading something recently that there's like 15,000, or there's a 1,500 or 15,000 different wavelengths inside the spectrum of the sunlight. And when you expose yourself, like you're saying, to the morning light, and then you expose yourself to the midday light and then the evening light, it seems to make sense to me that by nature, we're supposed to be really outside all day long. And so if I'm going out there, what I do is I will set my alarm every 30 minutes and I'll go outside for about just 5 minutes, and then I'll go back to work. By doing that all throughout the day and getting all the different spectrums of the sunlight, I would imagine that's really good, right?
Well, again, this is a loaded question, but I want to give a disclaimer because you made a couple of assumptions that I don't want anybody to misinterpret. The solar spectrum of the sun goes from 250 through about 3,200 nanometers, okay? And that spans both from the purple, which is the UV, all the way up to the far infrared. But the part that humans, our optical window, both via our eyes and skin, are operational between 250 nanometers and about 780 nanometers. Just so you're clear, mm-hmm. It's 15,000 frequencies. It's the number 81 followed by 31 zeros.
Whoa.
So it's massive.
Wow.
Okay. The amount of frequencies that are present in light are massive. And this is the reason why you hear physicists talk about the electromagnetic force, of which light is the force carrier, mm-hmm. has infinite range and power. And when you begin to understand that cells are functionally a quantum living system that is a playground for photons, you begin to understand how sunlight can easily control the 100,000 biochemicals that are active within us per every second. And that's the way it's controlled. It's controlled by light frequencies. The key is, and this is where people make their biggest mistake, the most important time for humans, and in fact I would say all animals, is when the sun rises and sun sets. But the sunrise for modern humans is one of those things that, I've done other podcasts here recently that haven't gone live yet, but one of the questions they asked me is, what is the single biggest health metric that you would advise people to do? And the number one thing I told them is to make sure that every day that you're alive from this point forward, make sure you see the sunrise. And the reason for that is your brain needs to see when that 1600 Kelvin signal light, that's predominantly blue mm-hmm. and red light, rises every morning. That's functionally what tells your optical lattice clock in your eye and your brain what time it is. And that goes back to the story that you mentioned that was on my Facebook page today. Mm-hmm. That's how your brain knows when to release every hormone in your body, whether it's in your gut, your pituitary, or anything else. And if you don't give your brain this signal and immediately go and open your phone and start checking your emails, you just jump from 1600 Kelvin to 5700 Kelvin in no time span at all. Mm-hmm. That's not something your brain is used to dealing with. And this is one of the big problems that we have. Just now, the flip side of it is something else you said. If somebody happens to be living in California and never sees the sunrise but goes out at 10 to 12, that means that they're setting themselves up potentially for a bad skin cancer effect. Why? Because it turns out that your skin and your eyes need to photoadapt over a period of time to slowly absorb the light frequency from 1600 Kelvin to 5700 Kelvin. And if you happen to only go out when it's 5000 Kelvin or 6000 Kelvin, like midday, your skin is going to get really red really quick because you have not had any time to build up your solar callus. This is one of the big problems that we have in medicine. We think, we go out and tell everybody, well, the sun is uniformly bad. Right. No, how we use the sun is uniformly bad because we've been told by both functional medicine doctors and allopathic doctors incorrect facts about how actually the sun works. And because now modern society is built around itself and its own needs and not the needs of nature, we have put ourselves squarely in the gun barrel of circadian mismatches, which is one of the big problems. I mean, the light that humans now live under is artificial blue light. We are not optimized to live and work under that type of light 24/7. Yet we've been doing that since 1874, and nobody realizes it's the single biggest non-native EMF risk.
Now, what if you go and get the first morning sun as the sun rises, and then you don't go, then someone goes inside and then they expose themselves, or let's just say they go inside and there's just natural light, there's no computers or light on, and then they go outside again at noon when it's 5700 Kelvin. Is that a mismatch? Is that something that they should do? You think?
It's a great question. I'm gonna answer you with an analogy. Well, as soon as I mention it to you, you'll start to understand why the question really has no face validity.
Okay.
So I want you to think about Home Depot. It's a really big, huge warehouse. So if arrivals and deliveries of packages came to Home Depot all at the same time, would you want to be one of the stock boys that was working there that day?
Not even, yeah.
So now I want you to think about what you just said. When you go outside and you get, it's 1600 Kelvin, then you come inside, check your emails, put the TV on, listen to, what President Trump has tweeted today, or, whatever you're doing. You realize you just went from 1600 Kelvin to 5750 in a matter of 15 minutes. Is that how the sun works? No. And see, here's the problem. The problem is when you have arrivals and deliveries occurring at simultaneous times and not the way it's supposed to be spaced out temporally, we call that chaos in Home Depot. What's the nickname for chaos in medicine? It's called inflammation. And guess what? That's the basis of every circadian disease that we have out there. And the real process and how this breaks down is it affects actually how electrons and protons are handled within those mitochondria. And it turns out when you make that mistake, your mitochondria undergo a brownout. In other words, they can't work or make as much energy from sunlight, even when you're out in the sunlight. And it creates huge amounts of problems. Now, the processes and mechanisms by which this happens, most people are completely clueless about. But that's what I teach my members. That's what I teach people who want to be mitochondriacs. And the reason I do that is so they never ask me the question you just asked me, because it is the source of the problems that we're facing now. We don't realize that we're not designed to be inside in a power grid 24/7. And unfortunately, technology has a good side. It's actually led to a lot of progress, but the worst side of technology is that it's brought us inside from outside. And that is the key. So the real strategy for the mitochondriac, to answer your question fully, is you need to spend as much time outside as you can. So I usually tell my members, if you're in your job, no matter what you do, if you can get outside, kind of like I just did with you, I'm sitting on Bourbon Street right now watching people walk by. What you want to do is you want to go out and have smoke breaks. You just tell your boss, look, my smoke break is a sun break. And I'm going outside even when it's cloudy because my brain needs to see what the ambient light censorship is so that when I go back inside and I'm working on my computer, answering my emails, and, you know, talking on Skype like I'm doing with you now, I can put my blue blockers back on and protect myself and take that artificial signal away from my brain so that at my next break I can go back out there and retrain my brain what time it really is.
Now, how are you judging the flow? I'm kind of more interested in like from going from, you know, wearing your blue blockers inside, looking at your computer with probably Iris or something on your computer, to going back outside. Isn't there a big change in flux from the two light sources?
It is. There is. But the key thing is you have to start with, how shall we say, a foundation. The foundation is the solar spectrum. So you have to realize that's something. The more you sample the proper solar spectrum, the less you're going to mitigate the risk from blue light. So, you know, most people that are in the biohacking world think that if you can use technology with impunity, as long as you have your blue blockers on. And I laugh and make fun of these people because they're out there. I've said for 12 years that, and this was a prediction I made a long time ago, sooner or later science was going to catch up to me and realize that that blue opsin called melanopsin that's in our eye is going to be found in our skin and our fat. Well, guess what? In 2017, 2018, guess what they found? I was right. So you know what this means? This means when you're watching the TV and have no clothes on in your house, but you have your blue blockers on, you are effectively doing the same thing through your skin. And this is the reason why, for some of your readers that may have read, you know, some of the old anti-aging books like that Suzanne Summers wrote back in the early 90s, she made a comment that there was a researcher from the University of Philadelphia that took a pen light and shined it right behind, you know, research subjects' knees and found out that it disrupted their melatonin, and everybody laughed at that in allopathic medicine for a long time. Well, I didn't laugh at it. I remember reading it the first time and thinking to myself, you know, we are exquisitely sensitive to light, just like a leaf is. I mean, nobody laughs, you know, down here in New Orleans when the flowers are not growing or the fruit's not growing here in December, because we know that the light doesn't have the power density to make those things happen. But we're completely unaware that the same thing happens in us. And that's the reason why the pen light, something that small, can have a huge effect. So you have to pay attention to your entire body. So that means when you are indoors under blue light, you need to protect your solar panel and your eyes. And the reason I'm making this point to you, and I hope you realize it, when I was in medical school, we had a pathology book called Robbins Pathology. And in that book in 1986, I'll never forget this statement. We talked about thyroid disease, and it said Hashimoto's thyroiditis is extremely rare. It only makes up 1% of cases. Today, it makes up 98% of cases of hypothyroidism. You want to know why that's changed in literally 2 decades or 3 decades? The reason is pretty simple, is because we've irradiated our thyroids with blue light consistently since we embraced technology in the late 1980s. And people sit in front of computers and phones and don't even realize that their thyroid gland is less than a centimeter below the skin on their neck.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how deep does blue light penetrate, do you know? Very
deep. It actually penetrates to the inner portions of your thoracic cavity. We know that red light penetrates between 10 centimeters and 30 centimeters, depending on the optical density. Turns out blue light actually has the penetrating ability to probably between 3 and 6 centimeters.
Really?
Yes. And this is the reason why, in my view, and most of my members and most of the people that follow me have heard me consistently say, I mean, if you've never listened to my Vermont videos, the 2 Vermont videos, one from 16 and the other one from 2017, I actually got on the stage at a Western A. Price event and told people that not the worst non-native EMF in 2016 was blue light.
Mm-hmm.
I told them that blue light is the reason why people have this bad connotation to carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I believe that carbohydrates are fundamentally bad. And I said, this is a half-truth. It's not true at all. Carbohydrates in season when it's spring and summer are perfectly fine for most people to eat. The problem is none of us protect ourselves from the damaging effects of blue light. And the more blue light you have, the less carbohydrates you can eat. Why? Because it causes mitochondrial damage. Mm-hmm. And once the mitochondrial damage is present, you can't handle carbohydrates anymore. But what do we do because we don't understand how mitochondria work? We immediately use linear relationships and blame the food when it's really not the food at all. It's the light was behind it 100%.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you talk about is really interesting. And it sort of goes back to, some basic principles that we've all learned about, especially in the natural healing world, is, eating locally. And I had a question, because I've watched all your videos, and I had a question when you were talking about the analogy that you give of eating like a banana in the middle of winter in New York and how that creates circadian mismatches and things. And so I had a question about that and what you were just talking about in terms of carbohydrates. If you're traveling, like let's say I'm going to go to Brazil or Australia right now when it's summertime there, and the local food is there, and the fruits and vegetables are obviously going to be summertime fruits and vegetables. What are the strategies for someone traveling to a place like that when the whole traveling itself is a circadian mismatch?
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. Like, for example, most people who are my members know that I choose to live in the southeast United States because it's only a 1-hour flight until the tropics till I get to the Yucatan Peninsula. So the reason for that is when I go down to Mexico, like I just came back from a 2-week stay down there. When you're down there and your skin and your eyes are sampling the power density change because of latitude, most people don't know this, but literally it's a due south. There's no mismatch at all when you travel within, the same time frame.
Right.
The Yucatan is central time zone like I am.
Mm-hmm.
You have zero problems eating the foods that grow there. Now, the problem is most people that go to a resort will say whatever food's provided for them, oh, this must be in season. That turns out that's not correct. So the seasonal approach, the easiest way for you to deal with it in your local environment is to sit down with a farmer in your area and say, hey, look, can you tell me what grows this time of the year, that time of the year, that time of the year? And that's what you focus in on. Now, it's gotten a little bit more dangerous for modern humans, and the reason for that is you need to understand that we also geoengineer our food now. And most people are on, the allopathic or functional medicine doc train when they talk about GMOs. That's not the biggest effect in food as far as it goes for me. The biggest effect in food for me happens to be the water content. And I'm much more interested in where the water comes from and where the fruit comes from based on the season that you're in. So I tell my members, for example, if you're wise, you'll never eat any organic food from the state of Florida or from the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that, it turns out that those are two states where most of our food in the United States that's grown and considered organic is harvested. And if you know anything about the way rainwater and the deuterium content works in a continent, turns out that anything on the periphery of the continent has much higher deuterium levels. That means that it makes much larger amounts of inflammation in your body. So that means functionally, from a quantum perspective, that an avocado in California is not equivalent to an avocado that's, say, grown in Mexico City. And then there's another issue. The chemicals that we tend to use, the one that gets the most press in the functional medicine world, which is glyphosate, which is Roundup, turns out one of the things that Roundup does, besides screwing with some of the chiral properties of amino acids like glycine, it allows for more deuterium to go into the fruit. So the way fruits normally work, they're deuterium bombs by nature alone. And they're doing that so they can spread their seeds all over the planet so things will go. But man has put more deuterium in them, so that makes these fruits a lot more inflammatory, especially when it's eaten out of season. And if you really look at avocados right now, they don't grow anywhere with the exception of California. Mm-hmm. And yet they're in just about every supermarket in the United States right now. And that's part of the reason why I've told people on another podcast that actually I did it not that long ago. It was probably so controversial they decided not to air it because they were big. I wouldn't say vegetarians, but they really pushed a lot of fruits and vegetables on people. And I told people that if you eat a cucumber and you live in Toronto, a cucumber will highly fatten you because of its deuterium content versus you eating pork belly at the same place. And they were just astounded by this. Wow. And I told them, I said, the reason you're astounded by this is because you've been fed a line of bullshit for so long. Because everybody looks at a cucumber as a health food, but people don't realize it's got seeds, it's a fruit. That means it's loaded with water. And water makes up the number one chemical in our bodies. And it turns out water, H2O, everybody assumes that it's H, meaning hydrogen. That's what our body wants. Well, it turns out the water that made that cucumber comes from photosynthesis. And people have forgotten that third grade law, that water plus CO2 and sunlight makes sugar. Well, guess what? If you've got a lot of deuterium in your H2O, that means that it's going to be much more fattening. Mm-hmm. And if you happen to live at a very high latitude, boy, you got no business eating that at all. And this shocks people because everybody normally thinks that carbohydrates themselves are fattening because of the glucose content. Mm-hmm. It turns out the single number one most important thing is the quality of the hydrogen that's in the food. And when you really understand mitochondria well, you'll begin to understand why the first three cytochromes have an enzyme in it called a dehydrogenase. And then you start to realize that's what pulls the hydrogen off specific carbons in foods. And then we have this thing called the matrix, where this very famous equation is that most people know about called the TCA cycle, or the Krebs cycle. Mm-hmm. That's inside the matrix in the mitochondria. And guess what it collects? H+. And it turns out that major quantum nano motor called the ATPase that uses hydrogen protons to make energy, it's only built to work with H+. It's not built to work with deuterium. Deuterium is an isotope of H+, and it's got double the atomic mass. That means that it's got a different magnetic moment. Well, didn't we say before light, water, magnetism? That means that deuterium and hydrogen do not work the same in a magnetic field. Well, don't we live on a planet with a magnetic field? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? You start to see how all these little connections come to fruition. Then you start to realize that when big food or big agri, or say your municipality, it's organic seeds, but you're using deuterium-laced water that's got 155 parts per million and not the normal 132 that the rain provides, you may begin to start to see that maybe the avocados and cucumbers that are grown in Southern California are not equivalent to the ones that nature makes by photosynthesis. Yeah. And see, that's what makes it really, really difficult for people, because they want to just eat an avocado. They assume that all avocados are the same everywhere on the planet. And it turns out that is not true. And that goes back to exactly the question you asked me. Why do I advocate people eat locally? Because guess what? You will get in a lot less trouble once you really know what's growing locally from your farmers. Then the question the mitochondriac will ask, is, okay, how do you grow your food? Where your seeds come from? Most people know that they want regular seeds, not GMO seeds. That's where they stop. But here's the bigger issue. The next question should be, where's your water come from?
Right.
And guess what? It turns out that's the single biggest issue, not the seed. And the reason for that goes back to photosynthesis, because everything that's made in anything that grows goes back to that photosynthetic pathway. And it turns out photosynthesis consumes water. And guess what mitochondria do? When we reverse the process in us, we make water. And it turns out that the water a chloroplast or a mitochondria makes is, how shall I say, racial. And I'm using that inflammatory term here for a purpose. Your matrix and chloroplast do not like deuterium. So it turns out the water that we consume and we make by nature is designed to be deuterium depleted for a damn good reason. Now, this doesn't mean that deuterium is always bad. It turns out we need deuterium in certain parts of our body, and it turns out it's really important in the first 2 decades of our life when we're growing. And the reason for that is, as I told you before, deuterium has a different magnetic moment than hydrogen. And if you've read any of Dr. Becker's books, one of the interesting things that he talks about when he examined mammals and embryos, that they always had a head and a tail, and they always had a positive and negative polarity. Well, it turns out that magnetic flux difference is due to the amount of deuterium that's present in different things as it grows. And believe it or not, deuterium is extremely important in growth and metabolism.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's so crazy.
Science always is fascinating when you sit down to learn about it.
I know.
But the problem is, most people want to sit down and listen to some idiot selling them supplements or food program.
That's true.
That's tied to carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And this is the reason why you'll hear me on different podcasts get very aggravated when somebody's selling somebody a bullshit line. Yeah. Because guess what? The reason why we all have the problems that we have, both in functional medicine and allopathic medicine, I'm going to be very clear when I say this. I think the functional medicine guys are as bad as the allopathic medicine guys. They're just using a different mechanism out of the same playbook. And I'm telling you that the people that I teach and train, they are mitochondriacs. The dogma that we have is nature, okay? And I try to tell people that I think most modern critics are not true skeptics. In fact, they're all dogmatists in disguise. And it's your job to figure out what their dogma is. And that's the key. And most of these people use skepticism as their muse. In other words, it's their facade that they can hide behind. And I happen to look at it this way. I believe that mitochondriacs, and my perspective, is a true skeptic to all paradigms because it's not based on any doctrine. It's based on nature. And nature's reality is present in our skin deep appearances. It turns out that when you begin to really, truly be a mitochondriac, you begin to realize that that is also a problem, because the science that determines nature is quantum mechanical, and it's not based on cause and effect. It's actually based on probability. And that means when you get to, I guess, the level of onion that I'm at, there really is no absolute truths. Right. And it means that every paradigm in healthcare has its own little set of problems that you need to realize, and how it affects, your perception of where you are now. That's the reason why I'm kind of glad you asked me this question, because on the surface, if you and I sat down with a glass of wine, and I told you that a cucumber is a highly fattening in Toronto, or that an avocado in California is probably not the wisest thing to eat.
Right.
That goes against just about everybody you've had on this podcast.
Exactly. Well, this is the thing, too, that I find fascinating about what you're saying, and I have found it this way for years following your work, is that there's a lot of times people will say, or you'll hear of circumstances of people who are sick, or people who, kids are coming down with illnesses or something like that. And yet they're doing all the right things from a sort of natural healing perspective. They're eating the right foods. They're doing all the right treatments, everything. And they still get sick. And it's just like no one really has any explanation. And you're the only one that seems to indicate there's way more going on than just the food they're eating. So we can't just look there,
Right. Well, this is the reason why the mitochondriac perspective is all quantum living systems. The defect isn't in them. And I'll tell you the reason why I say that, because that also is not an absolute truth, but I can explain it. Most of the diseases that we're afflicted by today are mitochondrial based. Mm-hmm. Doug Wallace has said in many of his videos that are public online that maybe 80% of diseases are mitochondrial, only 20% are genetic. I have recently said at a talk that I gave, in fact, it was on a YouTube live stream event.
Oh, wow.
That I believe it's only 5% are genetically based and 95% are mitochondrial based.
Yeah, I've heard Doug Wallace say that, but I didn't hear you say what you just said. That's crazy.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the more we learn about mitochondria, the more clear it becomes that modern healthcare is focused in on the wrong genome. We focused on the nuclear genome because of Watson and Crick, mm-hmm. but it turns out that we forgot the one that changes the most is the mitochondrial genome, and it's the one that responds most to the environment. So this is the reason why the mitochondriac perspective is when you get sick, the first thing you should do is don't look within. Look outside in your environment and see what it is in your environment that has changed the power density relationship to your mitochondrial biology. And if you do that, you're going to be far more effective than you will be if you have to rely on an expert functional medicine doctor or allopathic doctor. And the reason I point this out is I have so many people that come to me as new members and they want to, talk about their labs they just got done, from their famous functional medicine doctor like Kruse or another guy that does, organic acid testing.
Right.
And I'm like, stop for a minute. Just stop. That testing is absolutely, it tells you nothing about what's going on inside you. It says more about what was going on in your environment the day you had it tested. And then it gets even crazier. If that lab was put on an airplane and sent through the mail, it's affected by the environment until it got to the lab where it was deciphered. So is it really accurate on what is going on in you right now? And the answer is when you really understand the quantum mechanisms in the mitochondria, they happen on an instantaneous basis.
Well, Doc, I want to ask you this in terms of the blood testing. This just occurred to me, and I'm sure you've thought about it, but I don't know. When someone's doing a blood test, they're drawing blood, and this is one of the things that you make mention of it with a lot of different testing is, most testing they're doing under blue light. You do this analogy with Weston A. Price and the analogy of him looking at different people under full spectrum sun. So when you're drawing blood on someone under blue light, is that blue light affecting the blood that's going into the vial? I have been a huge fan of rebounding for many, many years. And if you want to get in great cardiovascular shape, tone your legs, back, and butt and stomach, as well as cleanse your lymphatic system from toxins and chemicals, you just have to start rebounding. It's imperative. And not only will it create endorphins that quickly become addictive to you, but it's very low impact as well. It helps to prevent sicknesses and diseases as well as increase bone density, and it flushes toxins from your lymphatic system. It's amazing. And not only that, but it's a ton of fun also. I do it every single day for about 15 minutes. And we found the best rebounder on the market today in the world, bar none. It's called the Bellicon Rebounder. It's the Rolls Royce of rebounders, in my opinion. And let's listen to some of what our guests have had to say about rebounding. Robert von Sarbacher is a health researcher and creator of the Mini Beat Protocol. And Robert, what's your favorite exercise?
In general, probably one of the number one anti-aging exercises on the planet is rebounding. So 15 minutes a day is good for that. You can find people who have had thermography scans on cancers, giant tumors, and when they're doing a rebounder, it would start spewing out and shrinking right in front of your eyes, the tumor would, as they're on the rebounder. So it's really good for that sort of thing. It's also very good for exercising internal organs. It's the only internal organ exerciser that I know of known to man.
Dr. Lindsay Duncan is the CEO and founder of Genesis Today. And what's the best way that you think of to stimulate the lymphatic system of the body?
Rebounding is incredible because it's good for the lymphatic system, and there's more lymph fluid in the body than there is blood. And the quickest way and the most effective way to get the lymphatic system flowing is through rebounding itself.
Yeah, because the lymphatic system can't really detox itself, can it? I think you know.
No, the heart, we have the heart, thank you, for pumping blood. And we don't have a heart to pump lymphatic fluid. The only thing that really can pump lymphatic fluid is cardiovascular exercise utilizing the thighs, the thigh muscles. And that's why rebounding and getting a burn in that thigh muscle is so important for the flow and the stimulation of the lymphatic fluid.
Wow, and they even put cancer patients on rebounding, don't they?
Nutritionists do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but not a conventional doctor. But yeah, I've been learning about rebounding lately. It's quite an amazing thing.
Yeah, rebounding's amazing.
Health researcher and author of Cancer Step Outside the Box, Ty Bollinger. What do you do in your life to prevent cancer?
What do you do to treat cancer? What do you do to prevent it? Rebounding is something that I try to do on a daily basis. A little mini trampoline for those people that aren't familiar with the term rebounding, but it's basically just jumping up and down on that little mini tramp. What that does is it stimulates the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system is one of our primary detoxification systems in our body, and most folks don't stimulate their lymph flow, and so the toxicity in their body builds up because their lymph is not stimulated, and the up-down motion on a rebounder stimulates the lymph flow better than just about any other exercise. So I do that almost on a daily, probably 5 days a week, I would say I average doing that.
And finally, author and speaker and creator of the Longevity Now program, David Wolf. Do you think the Bellicon is the best rebounder on the market today?
Absolutely. I was just with the crew in Europe that does the Bellicon rebounder, which is an incredible rebounder. My God, what a machine. And it doesn't use metal springs. It uses like flexi ropes. So it's very soft and fun, and it's just great to play with.
Well, there you have it. The up and down G-force actually stimulates every single cell in your body. It's incredible. And as someone who works out in the gym a lot and does Qigong, I think that the best physical aerobic exercise, in my opinion, is rebounding. It's just absolutely incredible for the human body. And the Bellicon is silent, and it comes with a warranty, and you can get them in several different sizes and colors, and some of them have bars that you can hold on to in case you're worried about balance. It's a well worth it investment in your health and in your future. So check them out in our store if you'd like, or you can check out the videos on extremehealthradio.com/Bellicon. Again, that's extremehealthradio.com/Bellicon. That's B as in boy, ELLICON.
Absolutely, my friend.
So there you go.
You're beginning to realize why I call out a lot of functional medicine doctors, because guess what? They get on doctors' cases about writing prescriptions, and let's put the biases out there so the listener can understand this perspective. I am part of allopathic medicine, but I've had the wake-up call about 12, 13 years ago that we basically treat people through the prescription pad, meaning that we come from more of the biochemical standpoint. Functional medicine guys think that they're these new age guys that have found, the basis and cornerstone or everything, and they use lab tests to try to get at a lower level. None of them realize that how the test is procured or how it's run affects the results. And it turns out that's exactly what the case is. This is the reason why so many people show up on my doorstep with all these labs, and I just laugh. And I said, let's start and let's talk about your environment. And literally within a week or two, they start to realize why there's a huge fallacy with the testing that these people do. And listen, some of these people have come to me with $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 worth of tests, and they're sicker now than when they started with these gurus that are on the internet. And the reason why, and this is so important for you to understand, remember I told you before about being a skeptic. Being a skeptic is really good because you always ask open-ended questions. And the problem is what we're describing right now on this podcast, these are things that are off most people's menus. They don't even think to ask these questions because they don't know it. And what does that define? That defines this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. See, if you don't know what really matters is mattering, you are going to be subject to the biggest bullshit story, either from a functional medicine doctor or from an allopathic doctor. So functionally, all of healthcare really has this problem because it turns out that all quantum living systems operate on quantum mechanical processes. And when you understand that they're not linear at all, they're all nonlinear, and they're all based on changes that occur second to second in your environment, that's actually how your mitochondria works. And here's the crazier part. If you take a banana and eat it under blue light versus going outside in the street and eat it then, the calories that you will use from that banana are radically different just by changing the light frequencies. Here's another one. If we were to eat that banana, say where you are in California, and say I put you down in the Yucatan Peninsula close to the Chicxulub crater, so it would also be different. Why? Because the magnetic field in that area is 400 times what it is in Southern California. So what does that mean? It means the ATPase spins faster in that part of the world than it does in California. So that means you actually make more ATP endogenously. Therefore, you will not absorb as many calories from the banana. So that's how a banana is not as fattening in a different part of the world. But do we realize this? The answer is no.
So what you're talking about is like you're never going to heal in the same environment that you got sick in. And
absolutely.
What I'm wondering is...
I hope you say that again and again and again. You can never get well in the same environment that you got sick in until you realize that that's what you need to change. In other words, before you spend any money on any lab from an allopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor, the number one thing you should spend money on is go hire yourself a non-native EMF engineer, rent their gear, and find out what the milligauss is in your car, your house, where you sleep, where you work, where you spend most of your time. Then begin to make changes and then see how things change.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I'm wondering, can that word environment include more than just the outside environment, like your internal environment, like what kind of stuff you let into your consciousness, like what kind of news stories you watch? Everything,
I think everything affects it.
All of it, yeah.
And the reason why I say that, the more you understand about biology, the paraventricular nucleus in the brain and the brainstem controls the sympathetic nervous system. And it turns out that the balance between the vagal motor system and the PVN is really what is the biggest knob. It's a coarse adjustment knob, but that's what determines what stress response is. And one thing that's very clear in everybody's research is that the stress response is definitely tied to how good or bad your metabolic machinery is. And the problem is we now all live in a blue-lit, non-native EMF world, and that dials up the PVN's reactivity and knocks down the vagal motor nucleus. So when you live in that kind of world, you need to do more things in your environment that improve the parasympathetic or the vagal tone. And that's what a lot of, the guys that you've talked to, they do tell people that. But the problem is nobody is discussing this 30,000-foot view of what really entails the environment, like emotional stress, biochemical stress, the stress from your mom, the stress from your spouse, the stress from TV and watching different TV stations. These all change the balance of power between the vagus and the PVN. And this is the reason why I make some pretty controversial statements, and people, diss me without really understanding my perspective. This is why I've always said, in my opinion, based on what I know since I've become a mitochondriac, just about any disease is curable. Just not every patient is, because they refuse to alter the environment to suit their mitochondrial genome. And it turns out, then you need to understand, well, where did your mitochondrial genome come from? It turns out you only get it from mom.
Mm-hmm.
And your mom's was affected by your grandmother's because of how meiosis works differently in women and men. There's so many layers of this onion for people to peel back. And I think when you begin to listen to some of this, you start to realize, man, just understanding carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, that's just not good enough. And that's the reason why there's so many podcasts, there's so many blogs, there's so many people out there selling people half-truths, because, look, I can promise you this, food is medicine, but it's not going to cure the thing that's causing the diseases of modern humans right now. What's causing the diseases of modern humans is how we've altered the environment utilizing light frequencies to communicate. Mm-hmm. That started in the 1870s, and it's getting worse by the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about 5G and 4G, but before that, I'm curious about this, because a little while ago we were talking about photosynthesis and plants growing in the sun, and you were talking about on different lectures you've done. And by the way, those Vermont ones are so good. Those lectures that you gave are so good. But so you talk about, okay, if I put a tarp over a tree, is it going to heal? And you talk about, or is it going to grow and thrive in a world where a tarp's over it? And what I'm wondering about is, a lot of people now are thinking about growing their garden in a greenhouse because of like chemtrails and pollutants and things like that. What are your thoughts about like glass or greenhouses affecting the photosynthetic, connection between plants and the sun?
Well, this is a great question you're asking me. I'm going to give you some good news, then I'll give you some bad news. Most people have no clue that plants are far different than we are. They love blue and green light. In fact, blue, green, and red light are how most plants use CO2 and water to make sugars. So growing things in a greenhouse isn't a thing that would knock you out from a mitochondrial perspective.
Interesting.
But I read something interesting, and one of the guys that I tend to follow, because he does a good job, but man, there's a lot of woo in what he posts. Dr. Joe Mercola talked about hydroponics, and how we're now growing things in artificial environments, not even in soil, but utilizing water on hanging baskets. And many people think that this is a great idea for a variety of different reasons, but what people don't realize is that water, both in plants and animals, makes up the number one molecule. And if you don't understand what the quality assurance program is in a chloroplast and a mitochondria, the things that we do to make things grow is radically crazy. And I'll try to use an example of something that is very controversial, but will get people thinking. Think about the state of Colorado. They now have medical marijuana. I know your state just approved it not that long ago. Do you think that marijuana grown under blue light in a big warehouse in Colorado is equivalent to the marijuana that's grown in the Amazon jungle that shamans use?
Oh, right.
Not even close. And guess what? You'll have so many advocates out there that telling people that, oh, well, if you have an autoimmune condition, or you have seizures, or you have, this or that and the other thing, that the use of pot is really much better than this, that, and the other thing. Is it really? I mean, if you don't know how the substance that you're going to use was created by man versus nature, in my opinion, as a mitochondriac, you have no business using it. Now, once you understand that the plant was built by nature, then do I believe that there can potentially be some uses for it. For example, I'm a big proponent of CBD oil for kids with seizure disorders that can't be treated with medications. And there's a lot of those kids that are out there now. Mm-hmm. But do I think somebody who has Hashimoto's should go to California or to Colorado and go buy weed and smoke it because, some guy in Berkeley, California, who's an acupuncturist told you that it was a good thing to do? No, absolutely not. Because you've missed the point. And not only that, CBD oil versus smoking weed, so the routes of use totally do different effects on mitochondria. Absolutely, totally different. And we need to discuss those things. See, those are the things that I wish people would have me on podcast to talk about so that we can take out the nonsense that's on the internet, the nonsense that's in the functional medicine world, the nonsense that's in my world. And the one thing that, if I can say anything about my own profession, a lot of the allopathic doctors know that many of the things that are considered evidence-based, the evidence is pretty flawed. I mean, I think most docs now are very skeptical about many of the things that we advocate as evidence-based because the evidence is only as good depending on how you study it. And we all know that most of the statin trials have been cooked by big pharma.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And it's becoming pretty clear, from some major cardiologists all over the world. The number one guy is probably Aseem Malhotra, in England, who's been pounding the table about this issue. But the problem is he's an advocate for the low-carb, high-fat lifestyle.
Oh, right.
And while he's willing to pound the dogma of statins, he's not willing to actually pound the dogma of the low-carb, high-fat regimen because it's got its own separate set tied to many of the things that you and I have actually talked about today. And that's what makes me an unusual animal on the internet because I seem to pick bones with everybody. Mm-hmm. And the reason I do that is because I'm trying to get the wise among you out there to truly become skeptics. A true skeptic takes no position on anything until you really examine it under the light of your own curiosity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When someone tells you that something is absolutely better than this, that, and the other thing, you have a duty to yourself to really examine whether that's true or not. And, I try to always point out to people, because I get asked this all the time, and I'll just use him as an example, is Dave Asprey. I personally like Dave Asprey. I personally don't like most of the things that he sells. And I don't make this a personal issue between me and Dave. There's no way I would ever turn my animus about some of the stuff he sells into an ad hominem attack of him because he is a good guy. I've met him multiple times. I think, he tries to help the biohacking community, but there's also a part of him who's a true marketer and a capitalist. And as a capitalist myself, I believe that you have to do your own due diligence. If you're stupid enough to think that taking an oil made in a lab is as good as one out of a coconut that's grown in the Philippines, then you know what? You get what you deserve. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And look at it.
Well, yeah, too, because it looks and sounds like what you're doing is you're looking at not just the nature-based approach to all of this stuff, but how the different environmental factors that no one's really talking about. Like no one's talking about when you take a blood test and then you put it up at 30,000 feet and you fly it for 4 hours across 4 time zones, how that's affecting the blood.
I've been telling my members this for 10 or 12 years.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I'm not a big fan of testing. And if you're going to do testing, how I think it should be done, the blood should be drawn and immediately tested right then and there for you to get the best data. The more time lapse and travel time of that blood, like say if it's going to Quest in California or Colorado, I almost am going to tell you all this test is going to do is confuse the shit out of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make any sense because you know what? It may have fingerprints of the cosmic radiation it got from the airplane flight from Florida to Colorado to the MedQuest lab.
Right, right.
And listen, my perspective is decidedly different than most people, but the thing I appreciate about coming on your show, at least you give me the opportunity to explain to people why I have the perspective that I have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love what you're doing. And I think you are one of those guys that are, 30, 40 years, ahead of your time. And it's going to take a while for people to understand what you're talking about. But I wanted to ask you something sort of practical about just for my own benefit, for my own self. When I'm traveling in a car, for example, I know you've talked about how windows block, I believe it's UV light. Is that right? UVA? Is that what it blocks?
It blocks mostly UVB, but it does block a significant portion of UVA.
Okay.
But it does allow some UVA to get through.
So my question is to you, if I'm in a car, like, is there ever a time that I would want to wear sunglasses? Is sunglasses something that you'd want to wear inside of a car?
No, I would never do that.
I
would just tell you, here's the biohack for driving is so simple, it's ridiculous. Just crack the windows of your car. That's all you have to do. Here's the beautiful thing about light. It acts nonlinear. What does that mean? For anybody who doesn't know anything about light, here's your homework for today's podcast. I want you to go look up a guy named Dr. Thomas Young. He's the first guy that ever did the double slit experiment. If you just allow a little bit of light, natural sunlight into your environment, you have already helped your skin and eyes. So if you happen to have, say, a moonroof, a lot of them, you can crack it or just open it. When you drive, just open up the windows around. That's it. That's all you need to do when it comes to driving your car.
Okay.
And for those people who think, oh, well, what if the sun's not out? The several of the sun's rays are still getting through those clouds. So the answer is yes, there is a benefit, even on a cloudy day, to getting out in the sun.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty simple. The other thing that I wanted to ask you too, let me just bring this up here, is a guy by the name of Dr. Sam Milham, and he hasn't been on our show yet, but I'm familiar with his work, and he's written a book called Dirty Electricity. And he was saying on some different lectures that I was listening to him a couple of years ago that no matter where he's gone in the United States with all of his testing equipment, he's found dirty electricity in the ground, even if he's been out in the middle of the forest. And so he was saying that grounding, because we have our bed grounded to the actual ground, not through the third prong. But he was saying that grounding in any way is bad because of this dirty electricity. But what do you think about that?
But let's put a context on it. But what he's telling people is very, very important. I would tell you that I think grounding in a big city is almost next to impossible because of how we've constructed major cities. So from that standpoint, I kind of agree with Sam. But I will tell you, Sam's incorrect that there's places that are not affected by it. And I'll tell you the best place. The best place I've ever tested is Navarre Beach, Florida.
Oh, really?
It's 17 miles of white sand beaches that are a national protected reserve, and there's no electric power lines that have grown that have been put under the ground by man. And here's the other place that also tends to be protected. If you happen to go into the Gulf of Mexico in the southeast United States, between pretty much, I'd say, Apalachicola all the way to probably Orange Beach in Mississippi, as long as you are not in a highly populated area, they do not bury the power lines close to the beach's edge. So it turns out in places like that, you're okay. Now, let's flip it around. If you go to Malibu in California, Sam's absolutely right. The beach there has power lines that's put in it, and you will find stray electric voltage. Here's the real take-home that I want to give you. This is Sam Milham with the Jack Kruse cherry on top. the big thing that most people don't understand is that the power density change that's coming between 4G and 5G allows for a very new phenomenon to occur, and that's called jump conduction. And the power density change to 5G is going to be so strong that we are going to be able to take dirty electricity from anything connected to the power grid, and it's going to jump conduct to just about anything that's a conductor. Okay? So that means the water pipes in your house, the gas lines in your house, anything at all will effectively bring dirty electricity straight to you. And if you really understand that, then you'll begin to understand why I've told my members for about the last 5 years that with time, one of the predictions will be shown that longevity within cities will begin to change. And it turned out in 2016 and 2017, the data is already in. For the first time in American history, longevity has decreased in cities. And the reason for that is the big change between 2G and 3G to 4G and 5G networks is because dirty electricity now becomes the biggest non-native media problem. See, before, it was blue light. Now it's going to be blue light plus this jump conduction story.
Wow.
And the reason for that is because of the power density changes. And just so I know many of your readers may not know this, the way the electromagnetic force works is it works on something called the inverse square law. And when power density rises, it means that you have more energy in the local environment around you. So the real problem for this is in a 5G world, you're inviting more energy in and around your environment that your mitochondria will begin to sample. And this is going to create massive electrical and magnetic problems within our own bodies. And that's why it's considered electromagnetic pollution. And the key thing is cities that adopt this fastest are going to have the biggest problems. And I'll try to give you a real-time example that just happened yesterday. I made a prediction that in the Super Bowl, they'd have at least 2 to 3 concussions. And people were like, why are you saying this? I said, well, in US Bank Stadium, Verizon was allowed to put 1,200 antennas in the stadium that normally wouldn't be there if the Vikings were playing.
Oh,
they did
really?
it for the Super Bowl.
Interesting.
So what does that do? It increases the power density within the stadium. So you have guys that are beating the hell out of each other on the ground. They're going to start to get concussions from really simple things. So there was a guy from the Patriots yesterday named Eugene Chung who got hit by a running back from the Eagles named Jay Ajayi. And Ajayi jumped right up and said the guy was out cold. If you go back and look at the video of when this guy got hit, the hit wasn't even that significant. But yet he was completely zonked. Well, it gets even worse. The doctors from the Patriots cleared this guy. He comes back in the game in the third period. And guess what happens again? He gets hit very minor again, and again he has to go out of the game.
Oh, my gosh.
And guess what? This has been lost on many people. The reason I'm mentioning to you in this podcast is not just because the Super Bowl was yesterday, and people can go back and look at the YouTube and see what I'm trying to talk about. I made this prediction before the game happened because I knew what Verizon was doing to the stadium. So I want you to think about Southern California now. Let's bring it fast forward to something that just happened in Santa Rosa. I made the prediction before cities got 5G that we would see massive electrical fires from smart meters and from cell towers just when there was minor disruptions of the magnetic flux from the sun. In other words, it didn't take a coronal mass ejection to come in. And people are like, come on, Jack, that's crazy. And I'm like, okay, if it's so crazy, let's think about this. What happens in the North Pole when the solar wind comes and hits our magnetosphere? We make something called an aurora, right?
Right.
Most people know about the Northern Lights. Well, that's actually how solar plasma gets turned into electrical activity, and we see it as light. What people don't realize is when the aurora occurs, a spark goes to the ground as part of the ground. And the reason why nothing catches fire during the northern lights is because all the trees up there are properly grounded to earth.
Okay.
So there's no fire. So what happened in Santa Rosa? Well, if you go back and look and when those fires started, you're going to notice that the places that tend to burn down had smart meters on them. They were cars with Bluetooth and wireless in it, but yet trees didn't burn. But all the houses and everything else burned. And if you go back and look at PG&E in California, they reported there was massive electrical changes in the power grid. And if you take it further back, you'll find out that 3 to 5 days before the fires occurred, there was alterations in the sunspot frequency from the sun that released the magnetic flux and electric fields. And why did it affect California? Well, what do you know about light? It's affected by alien magnetic and electric fields. Well, it turns out man built those fields in Southern California already. So not only does it have an effect at the poles, but it's going to have an effect in cities that have 5G.
Whoa, that's nuts. Is 4G and 5G? It sounds to me like it's
point. That's the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point, and that's what I've been trying. I think that's what Sam has been trying to tell people. But I've been really trying to tell people for 12 years, and I'll be very honest with you. I just did that member event in Mexico, and I happen to have 2 laser physicists who are members of mine, and they own a very large company in New York City that happens to know a lot about the 5G infrastructure that's going in the city. And I'm just going to tell you and your listeners what they both told me on the beach not more than a month ago. They said, Jack, and I hope I can say this on your show without getting bleeped.
Oh, yeah, it's fine.
They said, Jack, you're a pussy. You need to start telling people the truth. You need to start telling them just how serious this 5G thing is. And what they were basically both telling me is that you've been warning people, but you've been too nice about it. You need to get way more serious about it. And I'm telling you, my wife was sitting next to me, and so were all my members, when there was almost 55 of us there. When they both told me that, I looked at them, and all my members were like, Jack's pretty aggressive with his messaging already.
Right.
And he's telling me that I need to do podcasts like we're doing right now and start really telling people why smart meters do catch on fire, why cell towers that are 4G and 5G capable are much more likely to lead to forest fires. Now you know the reason why, and I'm going to tell you. Here's another thing that people will be shocked about that ties back to what Sam told you. Any city that's got underground power lines, to keep it out, and that's usually wealthy cities because nobody wants to see the power lines on top of the
right.
They're really at risk, and the reason for that is you're going to start to see massive electrical, optical problems in the telephone wires. You're going to start to see way more water main breaks. You're going to see fires underground. You're also going to see changes in earthquake activity in different places because of these effects. And people think that this is hyperbole. And the reason they think it's hyperbole, this again goes to the Dunning-Kruger effect. People do not understand the electromagnetic force. They do not understand that the force carrier for the electromagnetic force is light. When we talk about 1G through 5G, we're basically talking about power density changes. It looks to me, if you look at the latest NTP toxicity study that just came out on February 2nd, that it showed that mice did get malignant schwannomas. But they never told anybody that the mice that they checked were just with single beam 2G and 3G networks. That's kind of what we've been working on for probably the last 10 years. Even with that low density, there was still a biologic effect. The big change is we've been 3G, 4G now for the last 10 years.
Right.
And what does that mean? It means that it goes up by a huge factor. I mean, the power density change that we are talking about is just off the chart. I'm going to try to give you probably a baseline so you can understand.
Okay.
The human body generates its own electric current, about 8 to 10 electric waves per second. And we can actually measure a person's heart rate 20 feet away just by using those electric waves. Most people know that we can do it magnetically too, because we can do EKGs on people.
Right, right.
So almost everybody's had an EKG. So that's very controversial. But what people don't realize is that the human body does make electric waves. It turns out Wi-Fi, the current generation of Wi-Fi in our homes, generates a frequency of 2.45 gigahertz per second, which means that 2 billion waves are hitting our body per second. How do you think that makes your mitochondria oscillate? Do you think that the oscillation factor is not affected by that when we already just said before that blue light gets in 6 centimeters and we know that red light gets in 10 to 30 centimeters? Now let's take it to the third step. 5G will generate 24 to 90 billion waves per second.
Whoa.
And in my opinion, it's going to prove devastating to the health of the population. And the things that I've warned my members to pay attention to is when you start to see people going crazy on airplanes, when you start to see mood disorders show up in people who normally would not have them, when you start to see unbelievable amounts of autoimmunity and cancer in people you don't expect it, well, then you should start paying attention. So let's fast forward it to your neck of the woods. 50 years ago, the rate of autism in Orange County was 1 in 10,000 male births. Today, it's 1 in 37 live male births. So what has changed from in the last 50 years in Southern California fastest? Was it the food? Was it the drugs? Was it, Monsanto? Was it this? Or did we go from using radio waves all the way to 4G in the last 50 years? And why doesn't anybody want to make this connection? Well, the reason for that is simple. Our entire economy is based on the use of those light waves to communicate. I think you live in California, so I know you've heard of Facebook, Google, and Cisco, and the entire tech industry. They're based in your state. And it turns out that there's many places in California, in fact, where the tech giants live, they don't even have high-density Wi-Fi around them, which I find interesting. And if you read Steve Jobs' book, that's the reason why him and Bill Gates do not allow their own kids to use their own technology. Listen, I'm gonna take a page out of what my members told me to tell you.
Okay.
Normally, I wouldn't say this, but the tech industry knows exactly what they're doing to us. Okay, the Google patents are out there. They know that they can control the way we think just by the use of blue light. I'm telling you right now that the use or the expansion from 2G to 5G is going to be the single biggest change that's going to allow every allopathic and functional medicine doctor to realize that the environment is really what is causing us to get sick. Because my prediction is the amount of people that are going to go to doctors with sickness that no one can explain is going to exponentially explode in the next 12 to 36 months. Why? Because that's when 5G goes live.
Now, 5G going live, is that going to be rolled out in phases, or how is that looking for the whole country?
Some places already have it. For example, if you live in Austin, Texas, you already got it.
You got it already.
You live in certain parts of California, you already have it. If you happen to be in and around an airport, just take a Gauss meter and go next to the airport, and you'll probably shit the bed.
Man, oh man. Yeah, so we are in a suburban sort of neighborhood. Do you think grounding is still going to be as important?
Grounding has already lost most of its effect unless you're at the beach. The best place to do grounding in a 5G world is going to be actually when you're in the ocean. Ocean water actually is a Faraday cage. It's a natural Faraday cage. When your feet are connected to the ocean that way on the ground. Other than that, I think grounding is going to be significantly limited. In fact,
depleted.
This is where Sam becomes correct, that insulating yourself from the effects of city life will be probably beneficial. And just so you know, because I know a lot of people don't know this, there's already been reports both in Boston and New York City that people have been electrocuted touching street posts and lamps. Why is that? Because all the 5G antennas have been posted on street lights and lampposts. So you have to realize in your neck of the woods, start paying attention to where these 5G repeaters are being installed. Because I'll give you an example. In New York City, my hometown, on Park Avenue, if you look at these millionaire buildings on one city block, there is now 3 5G antennas on one block. Why? Because that's how 5G works. They have to increase the density of the antennas in order for you to have huge bandwidth so you can download your movies in less than a second.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what does that mean from the inverse square law? It means that they just brought the electromagnetic radiation closer to your mitochondria. That means that you are now living inside the microwave oven.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's worse. It's really not a microwave oven. It's worse than a microwave oven. And when you realize that you have an iPhone 10 in your pocket, realize that that's a bidirectional RF and microwave device that's connecting to that network. That's the reason why you'll see so many YouTube videos now with these new 5G enabled phones catching fire in people's pockets.
That's just nuts, man. I'm so glad I don't have a cell phone. I've never owned one. I'm hoping I can go my whole life without one, but man, these things are
don't
nuts.
make yourself feel better by lying to yourself, because you are based in Southern California. So effectively, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I'm still around it, you know. Yeah, it's so crazy. So is there anyone that's putting all this together? Is there anybody else talking about this? I mean, I don't see it.
Oh, there's a lot of people out there. I mean, I would say probably the number one researcher is Henry Liu at the University of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah Davis with Health Trust.
Uh-huh.
From the medical standpoint, there's very few people talking about this. And the reason for that, it's not because doctors are not interested. It's because doctors don't learn quantum mechanics.
Right, right.
So, for example, I talk about it because I went back and taught myself physics 13 years ago. There's another doctor up in Washington who talks about it, but unfortunately I don't really mention his name too much because much of what he teaches, unfortunately, it borders on pseudoscience, because some of the things that he's selling people I have a huge problem with because they don't really work, but it's very lucrative.
Oh, I see.
I tell everybody listening to this, the people who I think you need to rely the most on is yourself. Learn the information yourself, read the proper books, and then go out and hire an electrical engineer that's certified in non-native EMF. Have them come in and look at your environment, and then you make a decision. Because the coming change of 5G, the decision is going to be very simple for people to make. If 5G's the power density is in your area, you only have one option. The option is you're going to have to migrate. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because the only mitigation strategy that will work is the inverse square law.
Right, right. Yeah.
That's it. There's not going to be any crystals, or any bullshit that people try to sell you online that's going to work. And the reason for that is what Sam had talked about. Jump conduction is a real problem.
Mm.
And if people understood really just how bad jump conduction is, you are going – I'll give you a perfect example. In New York City, when one of the Con Edison power lines grows into the roots of a tree, a maple tree, say on 57th and 5th,
mm-hmm.
affects it, that means that there's dirty electricity not only in the tree, but that electricity can jump conduct onto other pipes in your house, come in, and build an alien magnetic field right in the middle of your living room. And you'll never know about it unless you have a Gauss meter to check.
Yeah, that's some pretty scary stuff when you start thinking of it like that, because you can't see it, you can't feel it, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah, but guess what? Your mitochondria can, and it does. And that's the reason why cancer manifests. People don't realize that the Warburg shift is a redox shift in your mitochondria. And until Doug Wallace's work gets out there, and until people stop believing the nonsense that cancer is a genetic disease, that it's actually a mitochondrial disease,
mm-hmm.
we are going to have people continue to not make the connection of where this disease came from. I mean, prior to 1874, cancer was unheard of. It was rare. And since we've built the power grid, there's a lot of people out there that have a fondness in their heart for Edison and Tesla. I think Nikolai Tesla, brilliant guy, but he was the architect of doom. His AC power grid that we all live within has allowed us to manifest the problems that we have now. I have absolutely no love in my heart for that guy because corporations have taken it to the nth degree. Our entire economy is now based on this.
I know.
What's getting us sick?
So, Doc, I want to ask you personally, knowing that the dangers of 5G and knowing that what you do for your day job, which is cutting people open and rewiring their brains and fixing their brains as a brain surgeon, are there any mitigation strategies that you are currently working on that you don't have? Like, what are you going to start doing about all this stuff?
Well, I do a lot. And the number one thing that I did in my professional life to protect myself is in 2017, I got off of taking call at night. And I also got my weekends free. So now I am picking and choosing when I will work and when I won't work. Why? Because I want to make sure that I can control my schedule to be out in the sun at the appropriate times. The second thing I've already answered for you, but you have to read between the words. And I'll explain it to you simply. People ask me all the time, Jack, why did you relocate twice in the last 13, 14 years since you became a mitochondriac? It's for everything that we talked about today. I found out in Nashville that they were building 2 Google 5G rings around the city of Nashville. When I found that out, I knew that I had to leave because it was only a matter of time. Turns out Nashville's one of the cities that's going to be an early adopter of 5G.
Wow.
So then I moved into a rural part of the Southeast, was there for a period of time, and then found out that there was some issues there with some military bases. So then I moved to New Orleans. New Orleans has its own little issue, but what's the big benefit, my friend, to New Orleans? It's got an international airport that's 1 hour away from the 20th latitude to a country that's very poor that only has 2G and 3G and will for the next 20 years.
And great seafood.
There you go. And that's the real issue. In other words, where you live is your best mitigation strategy for the coming wave of 5G.
That's so crazy. One final question I have for you here, because I know you got another podcast, is just sort of a personal question for myself. Our little furry 4-legged friends, our dogs, we have them in the backyard as much as we possibly can and in the sunshine and grounded and all that good stuff. What about blue light or regular light inside that's not orange? Does that affect animals? And if so, how do we protect them outside of getting orange bulbs?
Yeah, absolutely. It affects them. They still have melanopsin in them.
Okay.
And plus they are diurnal creatures as well. And this is what I tell my members, that your pets are your canaries in the coal mine. When they start to get sick, you need to start to worry. Why? They don't have as much, how shall we say, epigenetic software to protect their mitochondria as we do because they're lower on the evolutionary scale. So one of the really cool things for a mitochondriac to do is to go into your local veterinarian where you live and ask them, especially try to find somebody who's over 50 years old, say, what have you noticed the difference is between the pets you're treating now and the ones you treated in the 1970s and 80s? And you know what you're going to find out? You're going to find out a lot about the environment that you live in from paying attention to the other quantum living systems around. Animals and plants. And guess what? Do I do that? Absolutely.
Wow.
Vets have seen a way bigger change in pet care than even doctors have seen in humans. And this is the reason why we're the last. Allopathic docs are the last ones that are really going to be on the front line, and the reason why they're not leading the charge. Humans are the most complex eukaryotic organism on this planet, and they have the most epigenetic protections for mitochondrial diseases. Turns out other animals do not. And when you start to realize this, you start to pay attention, which is part of the reason why the first question you led with this podcast was a great one when we talked about seafood. This is the reason why all the bridges in Alaska and Washington now have turned the blue lights off on the bottom of their bridges. Why? Because the salmon lose their magnetic sense to get back up those rivers to feed those grizzly bears. And guess what? This is also how the electromagnetic force works. Man has completely polluted the ionosphere and the crust of this planet with things that it calls progress. And it's about time that every single one of you listening to this realize that there's a good side of technology. It's allowed us to have a nice discussion today for an hour and a half.
Right.
The other side is that this is the biologic toll that we're paying. And we all need to realize that we need to mitigate this. I personally think that the answer is going to be based in technology. I think the single biggest change that could help is if we just change screens to red light from blue. That would help. And then also I think the use of the power density needs to change. I think if you really want to have a 5G network, I think it should be built inside of certain houses, and it should be really limited. That's part of the reason why, not to get political on this show, one of the things that I heard recently, and I heard this from one of my members, is most people don't know that Donald Trump really wasn't a big proponent of net neutrality and also the 5G network. Well, I just heard recently that he was talking about taking over control of the 5G spectrum and eliminating all the ISPs and just making it federal. And, a lot of people thought that's a bad idea. Right. I got to be honest with you, I actually kind of think it's a good idea, because guess what? The one other thing that people need to know about 5G, it's very hackable frequency of using it. And I'm going to tell you that you need to control it on a federal basis, because let's just, for argument's sake, and say that we do get a geomagnetic storm, from a CME, and say it's only like a class 1 or a class M, and we need to have the ability as a country to turn off the grid where that is going to impact us. And we're never going to be able to have that level of control if we got AT&T, Verizon, Bell South,
right,
you name it. These guys all are working for their shareholders and profits. And when you think about it from my perspective, actually having a single source controller makes a lot of sense. And people need to realize that the federal government, through the FCC law in 1996, is what auctions the spectrum. The only reason that we're getting 5G is because the FCC is opening that part of the spectrum, to communication companies. And when you realize that the federal government has that control, it may give you a completely different spin on maybe why you need to pay attention to what politicians are really saying, because there is a huge benefit. I'm not a big fan of governmental control in healthcare. I think people need to be able to make their own choices with their own doctor. But I have to tell you, because I'm a libertarian, but I will tell you, I think Trump's idea about single source control of the 5G network is probably one of the best things I've ever heard.
Wow, that's interesting coming from someone with libertarian tendencies, or is a libertarian, because that's the complete antithesis of that. So that's fascinating. So it matters that much.
The reason why I say it, it's important for people to hear.
Yeah.
Because I understand the physics of the inverse square law. See, I know what's coming. I know the devastation that's coming to the population in the 5G network. I told everybody, I just said, just look for mood disorders, AIs, and cancer, because you're going to see huge spikes, and you're going to see massive spikes in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I'm just telling you, this is the reason why doctors can't fix these things with their prescription pads, because the cause is electromagnetic. It is not biochemical.
And not even just doctors, allopathic doctors, but food doctors too. I mean, it's the same thing. Like they don't have that kind of power because it's like you're up against a monster when it comes to this kind of stuff,
Yeah, and the other thing, maybe we end on this. If people are really ignorant, and I don't want to say ignorant in a bad way. I want you to embrace the fact that you don't know about the physics. That's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is. If you've heard anything in this podcast that has intrigued you, or you realize, I need to know a little bit more about this, this is my big plug. I want you to go buy a book. It's called Going Somewhere by Dr. Andrew Marino. He's a physicist and a lawyer, and he categorizes his entire 50-year career as the guy who ran all the experiments in Dr. Robert O. Becker's lab. And once you read that book, you will begin to understand just how serious this is and why my members told me what they told me on the beach in Mexico 4 weeks ago. They all know that I kind of know what I'm talking about. And the problem is, when you hear me on a podcast, you're like, there's no way this can be true. This has got to be hyperbole.
Right.
What is this guy talking about? Let's bring it fast forward to some of the critiques that I mentioned in the podcast. What am I trying to sell you here? Nothing but information. I'm not trying to sell you any pills. I'm not trying to sell you any books. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to sell you on knowledge. And the knowledge that I need you to know is that nature has the answer, the prescription for you, but you need to learn how to apply it properly. And until you do that, you're at risk. You're going to need term insurance instead of a functional medicine test.
Right. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Well, Doc, I'll let you go because I want you to make sure you have enough energy for your next podcast. Man, thanks so much for your time today and just everything you're doing. It's so antithetical and so different than what 99.9% of people out there are talking about. And that's why I think you're probably the most important person in terms of getting to the root cause of what's really going on. So thank you for your work. And man, I've just been having a field day going through all of your YouTube videos, and it's just been so much fun. So thank you for your time today.
Well, I would tell you, I'm not the most important one. The most important one are the ears and the eyes that listen to this podcast. Why? They have to learn how to tap the doctor in their own head and protect themselves. Because I tell everybody, if you're not good enough for yourself, who are you really good for? Yeah, so true. All right, well, let's do it again sometime. If you can, if you want, that would be awesome. And make sure to have a fun rest of your day and a fun podcast on your next one. All right, take care. All right, thanks, Jack. Bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye. Did you know that conventional dog food contains antibiotics, herbicides, pesticides, ground up carcasses from roadkill subjected to high heat processing, artificial colors, chemical preservatives, way too many carbohydrates, genetically modified corn syrups, indigestible grains, and a lack of moisture content in the dry kibble? Obviously, this can lead to health conditions like diabetes, itchy skin, teeth and gum problems, liver damage, obesity, behavioral issues, pancreatic problems, and even cancer. That's why we recommend the BARF diet, which is the biologically appropriate raw food diet from Barf World. Their unprocessed raw meats contain bone, organ meats, vitamins, and minerals that are loaded with enzymes. Barf World founder Robert Mueller explains more.
Sure, I don't have to convince you on the damage that's caused by high heat to food. So as a result, we see many skin disorders, a lot of arthritis, obesity, heart disease, cancers. I mean, it's just rampant. The vet clinics are just full of these conditions. And basically a large percentage of the commercial pet food that's made is made up of the human industry leftovers. And the pet food industry makes use of this waste product. And in addition to that, we are subjected to the products coming out of the rendering plants. Garbage in, garbage out. If you feed garbage to your dog, you're going to end up with garbage health. You know, if you put the right gas in, your engine runs smoother and lasts longer. So if you put the right fuel in the tank, you're going to get the right output. Garbage in, garbage out.
We've seen an immense difference with our dog Maggie being on this diet. Give your dog the gift of health today by going to extremehealthradio.com/barf or go to our store. That's extremehealthradio.com/barf to learn even more.
So I think moving into the year 2013 and beyond, we're going to have to get really creative and develop a strategy of how to get healthy and the ways to get medicines into our body that are unique and specialized. And I first heard of nebulizing from David Wolfe. If you want to listen to his episode, it's episode number 35. But he talks about nebulizing different medicines. And what that means is turning liquids into a smoke, basically, that you can breathe in. And the pharmaceutical and drug industries use these things for patients to take pharmaceutical drugs and nebulize them so patients can breathe them into their lungs. But we're very proud to be offering what I think is the best nebulizer on the market. It's called the Omron Personal Nebulizer, and you can check it out at extremehealthradio.com/Omron. That's OMRON, and that will redirect you to a page where you can buy that. And it's really great because you can put in natural substances like colloidal silver or MMS developed by Jim Humble, and things that will kill on contact viruses and things that are taking place in your lungs. And it's a good way to get these medicines into your body. And I think that as we move forward, people are going to be sicker and sicker. And if you have a cold or any kind of throat issue, if I ever had cancer, I'd probably use a nebulizer. And the Omron is really great because you can travel with it. It's really portable and it runs on batteries, and it's really the best nebulizer on the planet. So if you're interested in this kind of thing and want to use these types of things, I think it's really critical. If you're traveling a lot or if you have a family, you want to just have this on hand, almost like in your medicine chest, so that if you ever need it, you can nebulize these colloidal silvers and MMS and other substances to breathe directly into your lungs to kill these pathogens and viruses and all these things that are living inside your lungs and your bloodstream and stuff. So it's very, very interesting. So these Omron portable nebulizers are a great way to do that. So you can check it out, extremehealthradio.com/Omron, OMRON, or you can visit our store and learn more about it in there. So thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show. All right, there you go, Mr. Jack Kruse episode. Let me make sure I get this correct here for you. Episode 569. Thanks, guys, for joining us. What did you guys think about Mr. Jack Kruse? Interesting stuff, man. I didn't know we were going to get that far deep into the 5G, but I was likening it to something similar to, like, you know, when they mix prescription drugs and medications for people, you have these drugs. Drug A may have, 32 different chemicals, and drug B may have 12 different chemicals. And not only have they never done testing on each of those drugs, but combining the two together creates this exponential effect. And I surmise that mixing 4G and 5G would be similar. Man, that is just crazy. So the real question is, what are we going to do with all that, right? What's the solution? I mean, the solution obviously is getting back to nature, but how do we do that? And how willing are you to make the choices that will take you back there and to restore the healing and the health of your body? We moved from our last place because it was an EMF hellhole. It was just, I was being radiated every time I did a show in my office, and that's one of the reasons why we moved. And the other reason why we moved is for us to be able to have a backyard with actual grass and grounding and sunshine. And so, I first got turned on to Dr. Kruse years ago, and ever since learning more about him and his work and diving into his work, I've made some profound changes in my life. Everything from, jumping in the ocean during the winter to we just ordered some of the Kaniki, what do you call those? The Kaniki shorts where it allows the sun through, tan through shorts. So I'll be wearing those in the backyard during my workout. I switched from working out in the gym to working out outside exclusively. Now all of my rebounding is done outside under the full spectrum sun. I'm waking up every morning and looking at the morning sunrise and getting that full spectrum frequency of the sun into my eyes to set the circadian rhythm during the day. I've got Iris installed on my computer, which is a program that you guys need to get. This is one of the best. It's cost $10. It's the most important piece of software you could ever buy for yourself. And so I've got that. I've got the blue blocking sunglasses. I buy those from Amazon and from a company called Blue Blocks. as well as another one called True Dark. So I've got all of those. And, I'm going to buy some more blue blocking sunglasses. Now I've even got them in the daytime. So I wear those in the daytime, the yellow, tinted ones. So those block the blue light, but they let in other frequencies so I don't get tired. And this is really critical stuff, all this stuff. And, so in terms of 5G though, it's going to get even more and more, what's the right term? You and I are going to have to get more and more strategic and smart and clever about how we mitigate this stuff, because it's as if we have no choice, when in actuality we do. We choose to live where we live. All of us could go move somewhere where there's, like he does, where in Mexico there's 2G and 3G instead of 4G and 5G. So there's definitely choices, and I would encourage you guys to start start becoming a light Nazi, and start understanding how to use light instead of having light affect you without you knowing it. And I would highly, highly encourage you guys to start. The biggest thing I've done in the last, few years is these orange glasses that I wear at night. And I wear them all throughout the day now. And it's just been the biggest benefit to my own health is wearing these orange glasses. And so it's massive, man. It's massive. So, grounding our bed is another thing we do. We have the sheets from earthing, and we ground our bed sheets. And I ground myself when I'm jumping up and down on the rebounder. And, so all this stuff is really, really important to understand how to mitigate these effects of modern living, because that's really what it is. It's, we're being taken down. Like Daniel Vitalis says, these degenerative diseases are literally degening us, but it's not happening at the genetic level. It's happening at the mitochondrial level. It's happening at the energetic level. And so it's super, super important to start taking our life back. And we can mitigate a lot of this stuff. I'm going to have to look more into how to mitigate 5G. There's a gentleman I want to talk to that I have in our database, that did a whole conference. I think he did it for Dr. Kruse. I'm not sure if it was for him or someone else, but he's on the cutting edge of this 5G stuff. So I want to get him in and figure out how the hell we can fix and mitigate all this 5G stuff. So, man, oh man, it's getting more and more complicated to live in this world, isn't it? But it only becomes that way because we choose to be enamored with and to bring into our lives technology. And if we didn't do that, then it wouldn't be so complex or complicated. So fascinating stuff. So I'll put all the links to all the stuff that I'm doing, like the Iris and the True Dark and the Blue Blocks and all the sunglasses and all the stuff that I'm doing over at extremehealthradio.com/569. So if you guys know of anybody who would benefit from this particular podcast, please pass it on, share it, and let other people know that Dr. Kruse is doing some cool things. So yeah, it's extremehealthradio.com/569. I'm going to go grab my breakfast. I haven't had my breakfast yet, so I'm going to go do that. Then I'm going to go do my workout outside in the sun. So hope you guys are having a great day. We love you. Let us know if we can ever help, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine.